Okay, so it's time to welcome our next speaker. He is Mr. Kedar. He is Managing Principal Director, Architecture at Larson and Turbo Infotech Limited. So he is assisting enterprises in meeting their strategic business needs by applying his deep technical skills, experience, and professionalism as a solution architect, encouraging contributions, achievements, teamwork, and growth, resulting in customer and partner satisfaction. Today, he will speak on the topic Key Lessons Learned by Early Adopters. So, over to you, Kedar.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that introduction. Uh, so let me just start with my detailed introduction. So my name is Kedar Deo. I have total 26 years of experience. I'm an enterprise architect and I'm the CTO for experience transformation in L&T Infotech. So as part of our digital transformation journey, we do a lot of audits or as is assessment of the architecture and come up with the to be architecture or recommendations from transformation perspective, both on the connected enterprise side, which is on the back end side, as well as on front end, which is our experience transformation end. And of course, the automation is the kind of key cutting across back end till front end. So we do a lot of automation specific interventions wherever we need in a particular projects. For last 6 or 7 years or so, I've been doing the RPA journey transformation for multiple clients across multiple verticals. Today I'm going to talk about my brief experience on the key lessons learned by the early adopters who wants to go into RPA journey for the first time in their company or in their industry. Based on the case study, I'm going to walk you through some of the lessons we learned. A little bit in a hard way we learn these lessons, but I expect that the lessons I learned while executing this RPA journey may be helpful for you guys to use it in your next projects or the engagements where you want to propose the RPA as the way to go. Okay, so with this context, let me just make sure I show the bigger screen and you're able to see the big screen as well.
Yes, I can see the big street.
Okay. So the context is this is one of the financial services clients where they were the early adopters in terms of the RPA journey for automation of certain tasks, which needs to be done on a daily basis or weekly basis or a monthly basis. There's a specific cycle time to execute certain processes at that particular point in time of the day. So what I would like to do is I would like to share my experience. How do they apply this in the financial services world, and very complex business process which I've seen, which was very difficult even to think about automation when we started this automation thinking. So I'll just walk you through this challenges I face and how we solve them and how we deploy actually this RPA scripts in production as early adopters. Uh, so there are a lot of common issues in the solution that may help you to deploy your RPA scripts into the production. So this is what I'm going to, it's more an experience sharing uh, than a specific, and also, of course, I'll share the best practices and the lessons learned, but mostly it's an experience sharing. You may be able to relate my experience with your current world, and it may help you, to overcome those hurdles which I face during my initial journey of RPA adoption. Okay. Uh, Feel free to intervene. Feel free to ask questions in between in case you want to know more or you want me to elaborate more on specific things which I'm going to present now. Okay. So coming to the context of RPA, I think you already hearing a lot of sessions since morning on the different topics on robotic process automation. So what we know is the robotic process automation is here to stay. A lot of the speakers in the earlier thing, they say automation anywhere. When they started, it was mostly a test anywhere kind of a thing. So you can test anything using this suite. Now, taking the same test anywhere thing to the automation anywhere itself is a journey in their product landscape. But all of the other tools which I've mentioned in this slide, the UiPath, the Blue Prism, the Nice, there are a lot of open source version of the RPA tools, but these are just the tools at the end of the day. But what's more important is understanding the business process where you want to apply this RPA automation. Now we have a lot of machine learning coming up in the RPA, the optical character recognition part in the RPA. So all of this is basically just a tools or a technologies for you to uh, help improve the efficiency within your organization. So there's a lot of myth about the RPA, that is it going to take away my job? But actually, it's reverse way. It's not taking away your job, but it's basically improving your efficiency or productivity, and then whatever the human capital that has been freed because the RPA is in action now in the company, that human capital we can utilize into some another serious work. So that's where the mindset of RPA is getting introduced in all industries to improve the operational efficiency and increase the productivity of the people. And then same manpower we can utilize in for more things. And very important thing is any RPA journey always starts with the ROI. So you have some return on investment in your mind when you actually start approaching this RPA for the first time. So have some numbers, but of course don't get constrained or limited by that ROI numbers. You may get a pleasant surprise that it exceeds your return on investment, whatever the investment you do in deploying this tool or getting your people trained on these different tools for automation. And of course, understanding your business processes during the way of automation. So that will super exceed your expectations on ROI. But we have seen the other way also, like a lot of people invested in the tool and the technologies and the people for doing this automation. But at the end of the day, they could not justify the ROI. So there's also a reverse thing I've seen in some of the clients where we deployed this RPA tools or defined this RPA journey for them. And the reason for not having this successful is because there are multiple factors. We'll talk about that in a while. Why the RPA can fail rather than achieving its expected intention or goal. So we'll talk about in a minute. So let's understand a different perspective before we get into this successful journeys of RPA versus unsuccessful journeys of RPAs. So there are multiple people in your organization, and everybody has a different perspective looking at the automation, right? So automation, like the digital transformation, when we started, everybody has a different perspective looking at the automation as well as transformation thing. So is the case with the automation. Everybody will have a different perspective. So let's see and let's understand the different perspective people have in the organization about the automation first. So starting with the business, then the infrastructure guys, and then the architecture team, right? So any company or any client you go and start approaching them for the RPA or even digital transformation. Some of these things also hold good for the digital transformation guys. But in the context of today's summit, so let's talk about automation. So these three are the typical categories of the people in any organization, you name it, irrespective of domain or technology or verticals in which they operate. So first is business. So when we talk about the business and then we approach them from the automation perspective, they say, you know what, automation it's not only about moving data from one system to another system. It's much more than that. So business understands this, like you need to understand our business processes. You need to understand the inefficiencies within the way we operate using those business processes, and you need to identify the bottlenecks or issues where we need to optimize those business process. So it's basically in the three things: eliminate, optimize, and then automate. So the theme of my presentation is on these three keywords: the eliminate, optimize, and automate. So when business people say, let's eliminate certain business processes which are not required. So there's a big lean principle or methodology behind lean, how to reduce the waste, before even you approach on the automating or optimizing things. So let's eliminate some redundant and unnecessary business processes. Then next step is to optimize certain processes or introduce some new processes in the way going forward. And after we achieve this step one and step two, talk about automation. So in short, let's not automate the dirty business processes. Okay, so that's the perspective coming from the business. When it comes to the infrastructure or infosec guys, and they started viewing this automation from their own perspective. They say, automation for us is buying two licenses. So whether it's UiPath, Automate Anywhere, Blue Prism, or whichever tool, COTS product, or even some of the open source tools are also equally popular now, but most of the people go with the enterprise ready tools for RPA. So for InfoSec team is buying additional licenses, then deploying it on their infrastructure, which also involves some security issues. So one of the security issues for this financial services customers, for which I'm going to show a case study, is getting a login for the bot. Okay, which is not very common in the financial services world. They said we can't have a bot login. It has to be a person associated with that bot login, because if something goes wrong, we can't blame a bot. We'll have to blame a person, for example. So that's there in a way kind of a policy in financial services world. So they're saying getting a bot login itself took a couple of months approval from senior executives till the business. Why we need that? So once that has been done, then we got this security audit done for the tool. And then we started investing in the necessary hardware where we're going to deploy this tool, and then the support staff who's going to maintain those scripts once they are in production. Okay, so this is another perspective just want to give you from the infrastructure. And the last but not the least is the architect people. So I'm the enterprise architect in LTI. So we also approach it automation in slightly different way on the similar three keywords: eliminate, optimize, and automate. The first eliminate word from the architecture perspective is to retire the few legacy applications. Okay, again, the theme is the same. Let's not automate the dirty processes or even dirty applications in the architecture context. So let's retire few legacy apps. Let's do the app modernization or the tech modernization, so to say. That's what I'm saying. It's pretty much similar to the digital transformation uh, perspective, how we approach it in this digital transformation across the clients. So in RPA also we say, let's retire, let's do digital modernization, app modernization, and then let's talk about upgrading these existing things or retiring few things or replacing few applications with the low code platforms. There are a lot of low code platforms now you must have seen in the industry, the Pega Out systems, Mendix. Microsoft has its own Power Automate. So let's introduce a use case where we want to retire few legacy applications because they are not capable of handling large business volume, or they are not designed, for this large scale scalability or performance. So that's our first step in automation. Next thing is, let's talk about optimizing certain systems which is part of your current architecture or technology landscape. So that means also introducing the APIs, so making it APIfication across the industry, then introducing few things called microservices, then doing a business process modeling, and then using the containerization and Kubernetes way of deploying your applications onto the marketplace or putting it on the cloud. So all this is the second step, and last and is the automation. So when you approach this automation, it's eliminate, optimize, and automate. Means once the architecture is cleaned up, the systems are replaced with a modern technology stack, the APIfication microservices layer has been introduced. Now let's think about automation. Okay, so in short, again, when the architects agree to saying that do not automate the inefficient processes or improve them, first clean them up and then automate. Okay, now you'll start wondering what's the ROI if I spend a lot of time into this, how much time it'll take, and it'll go forever, and I'll not be able to automate anything. So can we go with agile way and do something about it? And any questions? Somebody's sharing the video. Do you have any question? Feel free to intervene.
No, I think they will ask in the last, I believe.
Okay, no worries. So, I mean, I hope you will agree to this perspective coming from business, infrastructure, and architect in terms of automating things. And then most important thing is the ROI calculations, which are anyway vital. So even if you decide to eliminate certain things or optimize certain things, how much is the cost involved? And then you automate, that also equally involves a lot of cost. So just think about all these aspects before you approach this automation. I think that's the key takeaway from this slide. Moving on to the next one now, I'll give you the case study of the investment bank where we applied this journey from scratch as a greenfield project from automation perspective. And then there are a lot of challenges we have this on the ground, and I'll just give you a quick walkthrough of how did we overcome those challenges and take this RPA journey into the production in a span of 37 to 38 weeks. And we did it. We deployed this in production, and we saved a lot of FTEs, and the ROI calculation was completely justified uh, when we actually rolled this in production. So one of the case in the context of case study, I can't disclose the name of the client and the company, but think of this as a large investment bank where there's a very complex business process called securitization. So in short, the bank, any investment bank, they hold a lot of liquidity assets or liquid amount. So those liquidity amount needs to be converted into tradable units, and process of doing this, converting the liquid amount which bank holds into the tradable units is called securitization at a high level. So think of it as a very complex business process. So there were multiple pain points when we started approaching this securitization process from the automation perspective. First is we found that there are a lot of manual touch points. It's a fairly a manual process of taking this liquid amount, understanding how much liquidity bank holds, and then converting this into tradable units and putting it into the stock market for people to go and buy, and then measuring the revenue, how much revenue has been generated out of those tradable units for the bank, right? So that itself takes 7 hours, and it needs 9 days a month uh, to do all of this processing and converting and uploading, and then uh, tracking it after it's been traded onto the stock exchange for the bank. Right, so it's a heavy exercise, and there are fixed deadlines. Uh, and if the deadlines are not met, there's a financial penalty for the bank, or the lot of big loss for the bank because you're not utilizing your liquidity in the right way, or you're not modeling the right scenarios. Like in COVID scenario, lot of bank, they have this liquidity cash, but they cannot use the traditional way of investing that. So all of this becomes a big loss for the bank if you don't do this in the right time. And then there's expensive licensing cost for maintaining the hardware or software for executing this business process. So that itself was a challenge. And uh, and there's a target state is that the business process runs itself, reducing running cost to an ad hoc support. So we need a lot of ad hoc support in the way. If something goes wrong during that fixed hours, 7 hours within a day, then it's like a nightmare. We need to call people over the night and bring them on the call, and then help streamline this operations. And it's purely manual. So that's what the challenge was. So now, if you look at the right-hand side, this is like the multiple sources where the data is coming from. It's fed into from one system to another system in a manual way. And this is your mainframe system, the Blade, which is a backbone of all the investment banks. And mainframes are going to stay forever, we believe. But so the bottleneck was this mainframe system where certain JCL jobs needs to be fired, triggered manually. And then once the transaction is, or the batch process is done, then we get this data out, and then we put it for click view, for a tab view for reporting, or pass that into some another Xersys or ABS manager systems for further, taking that data further for the processing perspective. So uh, the point is, it's like 11-step process, taking the data from one system to another system, and then sending it to the further systems and reporting engines. And so it's transfer of files. It's taking a lot of FTPing the data from one thing to another thing, zipping, unzipping, copying, running the SAS scripts from the mainframes, and submitting jobs to the Blade, which is a mainframe system, and preparing the documents for reporting. And then also sending the confirmation mails that at every touch points, manual touch points, people needs to be informed that this has been done successfully, or if it's not been done successfully, they need to know why it has not been done, and things like that. So in short, it's a very complex process. And the challenges from the automation perspective is like a lot of unknown business processes. Even the business people have their own expertise or understanding of how the business works, but there are still some business processes which are not even known to all the people. Not everyone knows everything. They have very specialized knowledge of the overall business. So getting that end-to-end business knowledge was itself a challenge. So when you want to automate this, unless you know the entire business processes, you will not be able to understand the impact of automation. So that was one of the biggest challenges. Then there are a lot of vendor managed systems which are decided to be retired with, and there's no absolutely zero documentation maintained by the vendor. So in order to retire certain things, we have a challenge itself, what that system is all about, what are the implications if we retire this or replace this with another low code platform. And another challenge was each system needs a different access mechanism. So every applications will have their own login and password. There's no identity access management, a common identity access management or universal authentication kind of a way to log on to each of these systems. So every use, and then based on the type of user, everybody has a different privilege access to do certain things in that application or system. So we said let's have a common a bot login across all these applications. So there's something called a shared dot concept in the investment bank, where the shared dot has been given a privilege to access certain applications. And then on top of it, we need to have a bot login, where the bot will log on to the shared dot, and through that it will access all these applications through a single login maybe, or multiple logins across different applications. So this is one of the hurdles, procuring this S dot and having a bot login. That itself took a couple of months. And I'm serious, it took a couple of months than a weeks, because approval itself was not coming up, and people have a lot of questions. What if something goes wrong with this through bot login while accessing that application? And everything is running in production. So very sensitive things. So approval took long time, but we got it at the end after a lot of struggle. And now we started getting into the automation serious business. So when we started it, it was like what we found. It's everything is manual. There's nothing in terms of automating things when we started understanding the as is part of this architecture. So if you think it's a four-layer thing, the consumer layer, the manual interface to the business layer, and then the data layer below. Okay, so what we said is let's where to start from. Okay, whether to start from the back end or the front end or middle end, or how do you go about automating things once we have a good clear clarity on the as-is architecture. So without going into the too much of details, what I just want to highlight from the automation perspective is there are a set of challenges, 7 challenges into this as-is part of the architecture. First challenge was a single point interface to log into the mainframes and other systems. So login was our first entry point when we got a shared dot and a bot login. Let's say the bot should be able to log on to all these applications, and they also need to log on to the mainframes and other systems. So user console management layer needs to be automated first. That was our first intervention. Second one was there's a lot of once you log in, there's a lot of repetitive work you got to do once you log on to individual application. Okay, and then once you log on to this, there's a business logic, or batch jobs needs to be triggered manually. Okay, so once the data comes from one system A to system B, the batch job needs to be fired as a command line with whatever login and access to trigger that business process, so that data moves from system A to system B. And then it's like FTPing the data, or zipping the data, copying it to some destination folder, and then unzipping it, and then triggering that batch process onto the destination system. So all these things was equally tiring and manually triggered thing. And the worst thing is the manual FTP from one system to another system. And it's all manually triggered batch jobs from front end till back end until the data transfer from one database to another database. And then the last thing is the security. It's also the security is enforced by the login itself. So whoever has the service account or the user specific account, they'll only have access to certain applications. So it's completely manually controlled security and governance process there. And then the manual data management for different types of data. So there are different strategy, I mean, different type of data, hot, warm, and cold data. So in the some data needs to be kept in a hot storage. So all these things was completely manually done. So when we approach this from automation, we found it's completely sequential manual work. There's no way for if something goes wrong, how did you isolate the fault? And the concurrency is practically it's not practical. So everything after task A is done, then B, then C, then D, then E. everything has to be done in sequentially. I can't concurrently fire or trigger few batch jobs because the data from system A has to be moved to system B, and then system B takes that. So it has to be a sequential than a concurrent. And there's a again tedious daily, weekly, and monthly processes which has to be done on that particular point in time of the day. So these were all the challenges. So how did we approach this from the eliminate, optimize, and automation perspective? Again, I'm giving the architecture perspective because I'm an enterprise architect. While the business and infrastructure is equally important from eliminate, optimize, and automation perspective, but let me give you the architecture perspective, how we solve this from architecture. So what we did is let's talk about the user console management layer, where we took this layer and say we want to deploy the RPA login script for the bot, and the bot automatically is configurable with the login and password to log on to that system. So first thing what we did is, okay, user management console is kind of automated through RPA login scripts, but what about the back end or the middle layer or business layer? So we said we have the bottleneck as a mainframes. So let's try to eliminate the mainframes. Okay, but eliminating mainframes is not easy, guys, because mainframe has been evolved so many decades now. So it's not practical to eliminate the mainframe application and replace it with something else. But what we said is let's talk about writing some layer on top of it. Okay, an API layer, which will actually help us to do certain things through automated way, or firing a curl command to pass or trigger the APIs, or use a postman or ready API kind of a tools, to automate the data flowing from A to B through a API way. So we said, fine, let's target that, and then we can transfer most of the other systems also as a API based systems. We have to retire the technology stack. We need to rebuild those things or refactor things and then make it as an API ready systems. So that was a step two from the optimized perspective. And then we started automating things. So once we have the RPA login scripts and then the API layer for mainframes and APIification for other systems, we started talking through API way, and the RPA scripts makes uses of the APIs than actually logging in, and all the security and everything is built into the API as a token key. So the token expires and session expires. So all these things we leverage, while communicating from one system to another system. And that actually helped us to get this RPA scripts configured in a right way and make it as a sustainable thing. So maybe UI changes or anything changes, we don't have to worry for maintaining this RPA script because they are talking through API way now than through a screen interaction. Okay, so these are the three things, and we managed to successfully get this rolled out to the business, and they saw a lot of huge benefit, starting from collecting the data till reporting it through Tableau, or we also automated certain workflow management system, or added some APIification in the BPM layer here also. So net, we made it a big success from the automation, and this is like a very first time the bank has gone into this automation journey. So that has actually helped them, to replicate the same thing across multiple business processes. Because securitization was the most complex process within the bank. Now they said having this very complex things done, and we can do this across any other business processes is much more streamlined way. Uh, and so now, what are the lessons learned in this? So, in the interest of the time, what I just want to focus on this is the lessons learned in this overall automation journey, either from the architect perspective, business perspective, or the infrastructure perspective. So, first and foremost thing what we learn is plan ahead and plan often. So the planning is very important. Like in agile way, we plan every day, but in this RPA, we found that we need to plan much ahead in terms of not just the infrastructure provisioning or license provisioning of the tool, but in terms of planning even the right business processes which we want to automate, and what are the different challenges. Do they have a documentation? Which system it cuts across? So aligning with the business teams early was one of the most important thing, as you will appreciate. In any automation journey, you'll have to have the business buy-in. And then if there are no documentation on the business processes, let's document that first. And at least the manual touch points, wherever business people needs to have a manual touch points to trigger certain batch processes or pass the data manually from one system to another system. That's where we want to have a clear documentation in place. That's what we learned. And then the next and important thing is they ensure access to all systems. As I said, the bot login itself was a different thing in the organization because we are introducing it for the first time. So we did a lot of proof of concept work just to convince people that through this login, through this access, we can automate a lot of things. Then there's no personal dependency in terms of triggering that work only through that person's login. While bot is still responsible, there may be a one physical person or group associated with that bot login. So if something goes wrong, that group is equally responsible, to get this under control than exposing that as a big risk. So all these things we have done, and then we do the ROI calculation before even investing into the tool and deploying few RPA development resources on the ground. We also did a lot of ROI calculation and convince business that this is how it'll help you in longer run. And that's the bind we got, and then things started moving very smoothly. uh, Next thing what we learn is on the mainframe side, surface automation is the only option. So we're trying to apply the RPA scripts for mainframe um, system where we log into the mainframe, then we click here, we click that. But unfortunately, it has to be surface automation. While any other Windows-based application or web-based application, all these UiPath and Blue Prism tools, they easily identify the controls, and using the ID, they can help click that through the scripts. But in mainframes, it's not practical to get the HTML ID or element ID of that control. And so we have to rely on the pixel clicks, so what we call as a surface automation in mainframe systems. And also in the process, we learned that a lot of Excel files the bank generates, and then sometimes it's easy to write Excel macros to automate that data than writing a complex RPA scripts just to do the massaging of the data, or applying the formula on the data through RPA scripts. Better to write macros in Excel, that works faster. So you have Excel data coming up, and then macros applies, and then you convert that data into a right data, and then you feed that data into other applications. So uh, how do you prioritize your RPA script writing versus creating an Excel macro? We found Excel macro creation was much faster and efficient, because RPA script also needs to be maintained, uh, and then that is also itself a tedious task, right? So in terms of lessons learned, in terms of summary, so you'll have to have a good process assessment methodology from the business perspective. Assess the processes which you have, identify the key processes or key business processes where you think automation can help. Then there are some best practices on process selection, which are the most critical business processes in your industry or in your company. Use those best practices for selecting the right process for the automation. And then you talk about deploying a new RPA platform, whether it's Blue Prism, Automate Anywhere, or UiPath, or whichever favorite tool you guys are comfortable with or your organization is comfortable with. Just use that. And another important thing is the automate framework for single process automation. As I was telling, the concurrency is very important. If RPA works very well if you can get some processes which can run asynchronously or concurrently. So within the architecture itself, as I was telling, it has to be sequentially done. So there has to be a single process running at one particular point in time for that particular business operation. So if you can identify the single processes and the framework for automating that single processes, I think that will help. Any question? Or am I already time out? Or
Yeah, actually, time is over. So can you please make it fast?
in 2 minutes, I'll conclude. Yeah. And the last thing is on the once you deploy this in production, even for single process or multi-processes, you'll have to have a support people who are maintaining those scripts. You have to build those capabilities internally, and continue exploring multiple RPA tools in your journey, and document your own RPA lessons learned within your organization. So every organization, once they will learn it in a hard way. So please document that and pass it on to the next automation journey. Quick one, in terms of the timeline, we have 39 weeks typically, starting from discovery till doing the eliminate, optimize, and then automate journey. So let's not underestimate the timeline required for automation. Take it any complex or simple business processes, it shouldn't take less than 39 weeks. It's our experience. It may be shorter or longer, depends upon the complexity of the application or architecture. So don't underestimate this, and then do this proper discovery, analysis, recommendation exercise. Involve the right stakeholders within your organization. You do as this part first, understand the architecture, the initiatives, infrastructure constraints, and then come up with the outcome for the RPA in terms of deciding the right architecture, to be architecture or to be roadmap for your solution, and then create the RPA design, and then manage this governance and policies and operating procedures to take it to the production. This is the last slide. I thought of just leaving this few links to you, and it might help you, irrespective of whichever tool you go with. The Blue Prism, I found a lot of good documentation about how do we approach this automation journey from ground up, and how do you compare the other products versus which product you want to choose from the UI path. So that's it. I think what I just want to leave you with is, let's not automate dirty things. Let's first eliminate certain things, optimize certain things, and then only go with automation. So I think that's the message
Yeah.
I just want to leave you with. Any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yes, please. So thank you, Kedar. We are in the Q&A section. Quickly, you can ask some questions because time is over. So then also we can take few questions. And meanwhile, this is a certificate of honor, Kedar Deo. This is a token of thank you for your valuable insight and valuable time. So thank you for presenting and coming and giving your precious time. Thank you.
Thanks for giving me opportunity. So any questions, feel free to send me on my email, devkedar@yahoo.com. Happy to collaborate with all of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.